Well, the Hamas-run health authority says fresh Israeli airstrikes have killed dozens of people in central Gaza. Officials also say strikes at the weekend killed nearly 100 Palestinians sheltering in a makeshift camp near Khan Younis. Israel says the latest attacks targeted the leadership of Hamas, which carried out the October 7 terror attacks. Our next...
More than 9 months into the war, there's no let-up in Israel's bombing campaign in Gaza. This is the aftermath of a strike in Nuseirat, which hosts one of the territory's most crowded refugee camps. Me and my other sister were saying our Maghreb prayers when suddenly bombs fell on us. There was nothing happening. They told me, "Your brother's children died in hospital." Oh, Abdullah, my brother. The Israeli military said that over the previous 24 hours, its air force struck, quote, approximately 40 terror targets in Gaza, including sniping posts, Hamas military structures, and buildings rigged with explosives. But locals say the victims here were civilians.
A whole family died, the mother, the father, and the 2 children. And also Mahmoud, who worked in the civil administration.
It's not the first strike in Nuseirat. On Sunday, Israeli warplanes hit a UN-run school there that was used to shelter displaced Palestinians. It was the 5th out of 6 schools to be bombed in 9 days. Other camps for displaced people have also come under Israeli fire. At the weekend, the Palestinian Health Ministry said more than 90 people were killed and hundreds more injured in Gaza's declared safe zone, Al-Mawazi, as Israel tried to eliminate 2 top Hamas commanders. It was one of the deadliest strikes since the beginning of the war. In the US, the State Department had this to say about it.
They do have the right to target militants.
Does that justify attacking on civilians?
No, that's what I'm just saying. We do, but no, of course it does not justify any attacks on civilians. We don't want to see any attacks on civilians. We don't want to see any civilian deaths.
But civilian deaths there were. Doctors at the nearby Nasser hospital said they were overwhelmed with bodies and injured people after the strike on Al-Mawazi, an account backed by the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees.
We saw toddlers who were double amputees, children paralyzed and unable to receive treatment. One mother I talked to told me that she was told to move to Rafah because it would be safe there. And then she was told to move to Mawasi because it would be safe there. And unfortunately for her and her family, that was not true.
Israel maintains that terrorists are hiding in civilian structures and areas, and that it takes steps to minimize civilian casualties. Recent scenes from Gaza's morgues and hospitals suggest otherwise.
Well, the Israeli military declined DW's request for an interview. Now, Robert Goldman is a professor of law at American University in Washington, D.C. He's also faculty director of the War Crimes Research Office and co-director of WCL's Center for Human Rights and Humanitarian Law. Well, welcome to DW, Professor. Israel says those deadly attacks on safe zones and schools are legitimate because they were targeting Hamas militants. What do you say?
Well, it will depend on the particular circumstances. Obviously, you cannot directly attack civilians. The law of war, however, contemplates that civilians may become wounded or even killed as a consequence of an attack against a lawful military target. We have over 38,000 deaths reported by the Ministry of Health of Hamas. That's a somewhat misleading figure in the sense that it includes Hamas fighters as well as civilians who have directly participated in hostilities. So even if you subtract 20%, it still is a very, very high civilian toll. That said, this is an extraordinarily difficult military environment. It is a densely populated area. And the way Hamas has been fighting in this and in past conflicts, it is well established that they are using civilian structures. They have used hospitals, they have used tunnels, 400 miles of tunnels below structures and so forth, in order to hide combatants, to build weapons, and to use it for moving their combatants around. So it's an extraordinarily difficult environment. One has to look at each and every one of the attacks and assess. And look, we have this thing called rule of proportionality. And this comes into play whenever you're going to launch an attack against a lawful target that's located in the midst of civilian populations. And this rule seeks to protect civilians from becoming excessive collateral damage.
Understood. Listen,
and it really yeah, go ahead.
Just because of the complexities that you have outlined there, how and when do you think the two parties in this conflict can or will be brought to account?
Well, as you well know, several months ago, that the prosecutor for the International Criminal Court issued requests for arrest warrants for Netanyahu, a top Israeli general, as well as the top Hamas leadership, in connection with war crimes, crimes against humanity that have been committed by those parties. We have to wait to see whether or not the trial court judges will sustain those warrants. And of course, the International Court of Justice has also issued provisional measures requiring Israel to give unimpeded access to humanitarian relief. It remains to be seen. Hamas is not going to surrender its leadership, and the Israelis certainly are not going to do this, just as the ICC, as you know, issued a year ago a similar kind of warrant for Putin in connection with war crimes committed in Ukraine. That's not going to happen soon. This is very clear, if it ever really does happen.
Right.
The issue is trying to mitigate civilian damage and harm in the ongoing hostilities.
I'd like your thoughts on what the UN has been saying. They're saying that Israeli strikes are systematically violating rules of war. Israel's mission in Geneva, of course, has rejected the UN's findings as factually, legally and methodologically flawed. So in a situation where even the experts can't enter the territory, who can investigate this?
Well, you do have the ICC, who have a prosecutorial team. You have other non-governmental organizations and so forth who are expert on international humanitarian law that are investigating. You would not have a request for arrest warrants if the ICC prosecutorial team was not reasonably confident that they had an evidentiary basis to prosecute a case. What is very difficult is trying to prove that, for instance, the Israelis launched an indiscriminate attack, that is, an attack against a lawful target, in the knowledge that it would cause disproportionate collateral damage. This is extraordinarily hard to do. It is much easier to prove, for instance, offenses like what Hamas did, which triggered the war on October 7th. That is going in and massacring unarmed civilians. That is undertaking acts against people who are under your authority and control. That is different from an aerial bombardment or going into urban warfare situations where it will require knowledge of what was the information available to Israel, the commanders at the time of the attack. What precautions did they take? What weapon did they choose to use at their disposal that could have mitigated civilian casualties?
Thank you for walking us through that, Professor. Robert Goldman of the American University of Washington College of Law.
Delighted to be with you.